In the bitter autumn of 1899, a group of ruthless troublemakers decided to threaten what appeared to be just another aging carpenter in the fog-shrouded town of Mill Haven, Maine. They had no idea that the quiet craftsman carefully working wood in his humble shop was once the most lethal combat engineer in the Union Army, a shadow warrior who could turn simple tools into weapons of war, and whose carpentry skills had helped breach more Confederate fortifications than any other soldier in General Sherman's infamous March to the Sea. Before we jump into this story, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this tale touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salty breeze from the Atlantic carried the scent of pine and sawdust through Mill Haven's mist-covered streets, whispering between weathered clapboard houses and abandoned shipyards. The town hadn't seen a new vessel launched since the great shipping crash of 1896, when steam-powered steel ships began replacing the wooden schooners that had been Mill Haven's lifeblood for generations. The once bustling shipyards now stood silent, their massive timber frames looming like the skeletons of great beasts in the perpetual coastal fog. When Old Tom Caldwell arrived in a creaking wagon loaded with woodworking tools and rough-cut lumber, the town's remaining inhabitants emerged from their workshops like curious ghosts, drawn by the unusual sight of someone investing in their dying community. The late afternoon sun struggled through the fog, casting weak shadows across Water Street as Tom's wagon rolled to a stop in front of the abandoned McAllister Sons Shipwright building, its salt-stained signs barely legible against age-darkened wood. Through grimy windows, the town's remaining craftsmen watched the stranger unload his cargo with mechanical precision, each movement speaking of a man who'd spent decades mastering his craft. Tom was a weathered figure in his early 60s, with silver-white hair and eyes the color of aged oak. A long scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, partially hidden by a neatly trimmed beard, a reminder of a Confederate sapper's blade that had come too close during the siege of Atlanta. His calloused hands, now carefully arranging chisels and planes, had once transformed simple carpentry tools into instruments of warfare, crafting everything from defensive fortifications to siege equipment that helped turn the tide of crucial battles. Sarah Chen, who ran the only surviving chandlery in town, made the sign of the cross as she hurried past the renovated workshop. Her eyes darted nervously toward the cluster of warehouses on the north end of town, where smoke rose from the chimneys of the largest building in Mill Haven. Her reaction spoke volumes about the true power that ruled this forgotten corner of Maine, where law and lawlessness had become indistinguishable. Harbor Master James McDougal approached with an air of forced casualness, his brass buttons gleaming suspiciously bright against his navy peacoat. Behind him, young Port Officer Peter Ross lingered in the shadows, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on his nightstick. The junior officer's face already showed the strain of serving in a port where official authority carried as much weight as yesterday's fish wrappings. "Interesting time to be opening a carpentry shop," McDougal drawled, watching Tom measure boards for his new workbench, especially given our current situation. "Just looking for a quiet place to work wood," Tom replied, his Vermont accent soft but clear. The harbor master's badge might shine, but his nervous eyes kept straying toward the north end of town, betraying where real authority lay in Mill Haven. The young port officer's hand never strayed far from his club, though his inexperience showed in how he gripped it too tightly, knuckles white with tension. The truth everyone knew but no one spoke was that Mill Haven had become a fortress for the infamous Blackburn brothers, led by the ruthless Marcus Blackburn. They had transformed the failing port town into their personal empire, using it as a base for their smuggling operations along the entire New England coast. Their reputation for violence had spread through 3 states, leaving a trail of broken bodies and sunken ships in their wake. The south side of town belonged to the O'Malley crew, Irish dock workers turned pirates who blamed the shipping industry's collapse on corporate greed and took their revenge through theft and extortion. Both gangs maintained an uneasy peace, divided by Water Street and mutual hatred. Old Ezra Morgan, the coffin maker, shuffled into the workshop as evening approached. His twisted spine and wood-stained hands told stories of years crafting final resting places for the victims of Mill Haven's endless feuds. The old man's eyes held the weary wisdom of someone who'd measured too many men for their final journey across the bar. "Might want to stock extra wood," he cackled, leaning on a post. "They tend to break more than furniture when the boys get rowdy. Last fellow who tried running a shop here went through 4 workbenches before they put him in a pine box. Fine oak, too. Shame to waste good timber on a fool." What no one in Mill Haven suspected was that Thomas Caldwell hadn't chosen their town by chance. 3 months earlier, he'd read about a massacre at Fort Harbor, where both gangs had turned a peaceful trading post into a killing field. Among the dead was his younger brother Daniel, traveling through with a shipment of specialty woods. The newspapers called it a tragedy. Tom called it a reason. Daniel had been the peaceful one, the brother who'd chosen craft over combat after the war. His death had awakened something in Tom that he'd thought buried with his combat engineering tools after Appomattox. Mai Lin, the local herbalist and healer, visited as dusk settled over the town. Despite the frontier prejudices that lingered even this far north, her skilled hands and knowledge of both Western medicine and Chinese remedies had earned her a precarious acceptance in Mill Haven. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her medicine bag worn but well maintained, her dark eyes missing nothing as they surveyed the workshop interior. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, placing a small jar of medicinal salve on his workbench. "Consider this a welcome gift, though I suspect you'll be needing more than liniment to survive here. Mill Haven has a way of turning every man's past into his future." The words had barely left her lips when the thunder of boots shattered the evening quiet. Jack Iron Hand Wilson, the Blackburn brothers' notorious enforcer, burst through the workshop doors with 3 of his men. They were drunk, dangerous, and looking to make a statement. Wilson's reputation for breaking men's bones just to hear them snap had spread through 3 states, and the heavy iron-headed hammer on his belt had cracked more skulls than most soldiers saw fall in the war. His cold eyes swept the workshop, settling on Tom with the predatory focus of a man who'd found his evening's entertainment. Wilson's hobnailed boots rang against the wooden floorboards as he swaggered toward the workbench, his men spreading out behind him like wolves circling wounded prey. The lamplight caught the polished head of his hammer, a weapon more for show than practicality, Tom noted. The handle was wrapped in fancy leather strips, a sure sign of a man who cared more about appearance than function. A real craftsman's tools showed honest wear, like the carpenter's maul carefully hidden beneath Tom's bench, its handle smooth from years of combat engineering work. The evening crowd that had gathered to watch Tom unload his wagon had long since disappeared behind locked doors and drawn curtains. Even Mai Lin remained frozen in place, her knuckles white around her medicine bag. They all knew what typically followed when Jack Iron Hand Wilson paid a visit to a new establishment. "Well, well," Wilson drawled, pulling off his leather gloves 1 finger at a time. "Looks like we got ourselves a new neighbor, boys." He tossed the gloves onto Tom's freshly planed workbench, leaving mud stains on the wood. "And he's a Yankee too, by the sound of it. Ain't that something? Probably thinks he can play both sides, make nice with O'Malley's boys down south." Tom continued shaping a piece of oak, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Each pass of the plane was precisely measured, like calculating blast charges for a fortress wall. The same patience that had once let him work through artillery barrages now kept his hands steady as Wilson's men positioned themselves around the workshop. "Our protection doesn't come cheap," Wilson continued, running a finger along the workbench top. "But then again, neither does a burial plot in old Ezra's boneyard. Ain't that right, Ezra?" He called out to the coffin maker, who had wisely retreated to a dark corner. $3 a plot," the old man wheezed. "Extra for the oak box." Wilson's laugh was sharp as a chisel. "See? Even dying's got its price in Mill Haven. But I'm feeling generous tonight. Call it." He picked up a finely crafted mallet, studying the handle. $500 a month. That's fair, considering the alternatives. Tom set down the plane he was using. "Seems to me," he said quietly, his Vermont accent making the words almost musical, "a man ought to earn what he takes." The words hung in the air like sawdust after a cut. Wilson's face darkened, and in one fluid motion he swept the mallet off the bench. It shattered against the wall, fragments of the handle spraying like shrapnel. "Earn it?" he snarled. "Like this? Mai Lin stepped forward, but Tom caught her eye and gave an imperceptible shake of his head. She stayed put, one hand sliding into her medicine bag where Tom glimpsed the blued steel of a small derringer. Smart woman. "That's $70 worth of tiger maple," Tom said, still calm as mountain granite, "plus another 30 for the inlay work." His voice carried the same tone he'd used calling measurements to sappers during the war, measuring distance, calculating angles, factoring in structural weak points. Wilson leaned forward, tobacco-stained teeth bared in what might have been a smile. "Or what? You'll serve us pine instead of oak?" His left hand dropped to his iron hammer. "Maybe I should show you what happened to the last fellow who thought he could." The movement was so fast, none of Wilson's men saw it happen. One moment Tom was behind the workbench, the next Wilson's hammer hand was pinned to the wooden surface, Tom's grip like an iron vise. The carpenter's maul had appeared as if by magic, its heavy head pressed against Wilson's throat at the exact angle Tom knew would crush the windpipe with a single strike, the same technique he'd used on dozens of Confederate sappers during night raids. "3 things," Tom said softly, his accent thickening like freshly mixed hide glue. "First, you'll pay for the damage. Second, you'll apologize to the lady for disrupting her evening. Third, you'll tell Marcus Blackburn that Thomas Caldwell sends his regards." Wilson's men reached for their weapons, but Tom's next words froze them in place. "I'll cave in your boss's skull and take 2 of you before you clear leather. Might not care to gamble on which one of you walks out." The workshop fell silent, except for Wilson's ragged breathing and the soft creak of floorboards as Mai Lin edged closer to her medicine bag. Tom could smell the fear starting to roll off Wilson. Not the first time he'd scented it on a man staring down his tool. $100, Wilson managed, his Adam's apple bobbing against the Maul's head. "For the mallet. And, sorry ma'am," he called out to Mai Lin, voice cracking like green wood. Tom released him, the Maul disappearing as smoothly as it had appeared. Wilson stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, hatred burning in his eyes hotter than the forge fires that had once lit Millhaven's shipyards. "This ain't over," he spat. "No," Tom agreed, already calculating angles to the windows, distances to cover, lines of fire he'd need to watch in the coming days. "It isn't." After they left, Mai Lin rushed forward. "Are you insane?" she demanded, checking his hands for injury with professional efficiency. "Those men will be back with Blackburn himself." "Counting on it," Tom replied, starting to sweep up the broken mallet pieces. He paused, seeing her expression. "Dr. Lin." "Mai," she corrected automatically. "Mai. There are times when a joint needs to be broken before it can be reset properly. You know that better than most." She studied him for a long moment, her clever eyes seeing more than Tom had intended to show. "You're not just some carpenter, are you?" Before Tom could respond, old Ezra shuffled forward, followed by the harbor master and his young port officer. Word traveled fast in Millhaven, especially when it involved someone standing up to the Blackburn brothers. "Should I start measuring you now?" Old Ezra cackled. "Or wait till morning?" Tom's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Might want to save your wood for the visitors I'm expecting." He reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of fine whiskey, the kind he kept hidden from Wilson's gang. "Meanwhile, it seems to me Millhaven could use a proper drink." Harbor Master McDougal accepted a glass with a slightly trembling hand. "You've just painted a target on your back the size of a ship's bow, Mr. Caldwell." "The target was already there," Tom replied, pouring another round. "I just turned to face it proper." His hand brushed the hidden pocket where he kept his brother's last letter, the paper that had led him to Millhaven and the secret that would soon turn the town into a battlefield. Word of Tom Caldwell's confrontation with Jack Wilson spread through Millhaven like wildfire. By noon the next day, his workshop had more customers than it had seen in years. They came not just for repairs, but to glimpse the man who'd stood up to Iron Hand Wilson and lived to tell about it. Tom served them with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown the night before, noting how they clustered in small groups, voices low, eyes darting to the doors whenever shadows passed the frost-covered windows. Sarah Chen had slipped in early, taking a corner seat where she could watch the room. Her presence told Tom more than any gossip could. She wouldn't risk being seen here unless she thought the balance of power in Mill Haven was about to shift. The way she kept touching the jade pendant at her neck suggested she knew something others didn't. Quite the crowd, Mai observed, sliding onto a stool near his workbench. She'd traded her practical healer's dress for something finer, but Tom noticed the bulge of her derringer had migrated to a specially sewn pocket, though I suspect they're not all here for your woodworking. People come to a carpenter's shop for different reasons, Tom replied, carefully chiseling a dovetail joint. Fear. He glanced at a group of fishermen huddled near the door. Curiosity. His eyes swept past several townsfolk who'd never set foot in the workshop before. Anticipation. He met Mai's gaze, seeing his own knowledge reflected there. I treated Wilson's wrist this morning, she said, her voice pitched low for his ears alone. Nasty sprain. I may have been. Her lips curved slightly. A bit heavy-handed with the splint. Before Tom could respond, Port Officer Ross burst through the door, face flushed with exertion. Riders coming in from the north, he announced, his young voice cracking. At least 30 of them. Blackburn himself at the lead. The workshop fell silent, then erupted in the scraping of chairs as customers hurried to leave. None wanted to be caught in what was coming. Harbor Master McDougal was among them, his shiny buttons offering no protection against the approaching storm. You should go, Tom told Mai, but she shook her head. My clinic's next door, she replied calmly. These situations usually end with patience one way or another. Tom nodded, respecting her courage. He began clearing his workbench of valuable tools, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The sound of approaching boots grew louder, like distant thunder rolling in from the Atlantic. Quite a welcome committee you've gathered, Mr. Caldwell. Marcus Blackburn stood in the doorway, cutting an impressive figure in a black wool coat despite the autumn chill. Unlike Wilson's showy hammer, Blackburn carried a simple steel crowbar in a well-worn leather holster. His eyes, gray as storm clouds over the harbor, surveyed the room with predatory intelligence. Word travels fast, Tom replied, continuing to arrange his tools. Indeed. Blackburn stepped inside, followed by Wilson and several hard-looking men, though some words travel faster than others. Like a name, Thomas Ghost Builder Caldwell, the Union Army's deadliest combat engineer. The man who could breach a fortress wall without making a sound, whose carpentry skills turned the tide at Vicksburg. Tom set down the chisel he was holding. That was a long time ago. Was it? Blackburn's voice hardened. I heard you were at Petersburg the day my younger brother died. Your brother led a defense against our sappers, Tom said quietly, the memory clear as yesterday. He was brave, foolish, but brave. He was 19, Blackburn's hand rested on his crowbar. Did you know that when you collapsed the tunnel beneath his position? The workshop had emptied except for Mai still at her post and Sarah Chen in her corner. Even Wilson and his men had backed away, sensing what was coming. I knew, Tom answered, his voice steady. Just like I knew he'd killed 4 of my men before I set the charges. War makes boys into killers, Mr. Blackburn. Then peace turns killers into businessmen. He gestured at Blackburn's fine coat. Or gang leaders. Is that why you're here? Blackburn asked, his fingers drumming on his holster. To finish what war started? I'm here because your war with O'Malley killed my brother 3 months ago. Fort Harbor massacre. He was passing through with a lumber shipment. Tom's voice remained level, but his eyes had turned hard as ironwood. Just a traveler in the wrong place at the wrong time. Blackburn nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his cold eyes. Ah, now we come to it, you want revenge. Tom's denial caught everyone by surprise. I want justice. There's a difference. And what justice would that be? You and O'Malley are going to end this feud. Leave Mill Haven in peace. Tom's hand rested beneath the workbench where his maul waited. Or I'm going to kill you both. The tension in the room could have been cut with a saw blade. Then Blackburn smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Caldwell? The next time we meet, I won't be so diplomatic. After they left, Mai let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, that was intense. It's going to get worse, Sarah said, speaking for the first time. She approached the workbench, glancing nervously at the door. O'Malley's men are in town too. They've been watching, waiting. Tom poured 3 drinks from his hidden whiskey bottle. Then it's starting sooner than I expected. He raised his glass. To justice. Mai picked up her glass. To survival. Sarah took hers with a trembling hand. To Mill Haven, what's left of it. As they drank, Tom could hear the wind picking up outside, carrying the promise of a storm in more ways than one. Dark clouds were gathering over Mill Haven, and before they broke, blood would stain the harbor waters. His brother's letter felt heavy in his pocket, its secrets still untold. As dusk settled over Mill Haven, Patrick O'Malley sat in his study at the south end of town, a telegram spread before him on a worn oak desk. The yellow paper bore a simple message. Caldwell confirmed. Ghost builder from Sherman's Corps. Approach with extreme caution. O'Malley crumpled the paper in his weathered fist, his scarred face creased in thought. The room around him spoke of a man caught between 2 worlds. Shipping manifests and smuggling routes hung beside Celtic crosses and faded daguerreotypes of County Cork. What do you make of it? He asked the man standing by the window. Connor Steelface Murphy, O'Malley's right-hand man since their dock-working days, turned from his watch position. The ugly burn scars that earned him his nickname caught the lamplight, a permanent reminder of the day a shipyard fire had killed 12 Irish workers in a preventable accident. Fresh rain was beginning to fall outside, each drop carrying the promise of a harsh autumn storm ahead. Man's got steel in his spine, I'll give him that, Murphy drawled, his Irish accent thickened by years in America. Taking on both sides at once, either he's mad as a March hare or he's exactly what his reputation claims, O'Malley finished. O'Malley stood, walking to a cabinet where an old ship's nail hung mounted on the wall, its head flattened from years securing planks across the Atlantic. Beside it hung a collection of wanted posters, some for his own men, others for Blackburn's gang, all telling the story of Mill Haven's descent into lawlessness. You remember Petersburg, Connor? The way our Irish brigade kept losing fortifications to impossible breaches. The way walls would crumble before we even heard the sappers coming. Murphy nodded slowly, unconsciously touching the shrapnel scar on his neck. That was him. Ghost builder. That was him. The man who broke through our strongest positions like they were made of driftwood. O'Malley's fingers traced the ship's nail. Now he's here, threatening both me and Blackburn. What's your read? Murphy's burned face hardened. Send word to our boys. I want eyes on that workshop round the clock. And get me everything you can on his brother, the one killed at Fort Harbor. There's something about that massacre that doesn't sit right with me. You think that's what brought him here? A man like Caldwell doesn't retire to a war zone by chance. Murphy checked the loads in his Navy revolver, a blood-stained souvenir from his time in the British Merchant Marine. And while Marcus Blackburn might have forgotten what real war looks like, we haven't. We learned that lesson laying keels under company guns and rival gangs. Across town, Tom was closing up the workshop when Jimmy Chen, Mai's teenage brother, slipped in through the back door. The boy's face was grave beyond his years, his quick eyes marking him as his sister's kin. O'Malley's men are setting up watching posts, he reported. Tom offered the boy a carved whistle he'd been working on. Except the cooperage. 3 teams of 2, rotating shifts, professional work. They've got someone in the old lighthouse tower, another in the abandoned harbormaster's office, and a 3rd team moving between them. Tom nodded, counting his tools for inventory. Military precision. Old habits die hard. These aren't just thugs, you know. They're veterans, like their boss. That's not all, Jimmy continued, lowering his voice though they were alone. I heard from my sister's friend in Fort Harbor about your brother's death. People there still talk about it in whispers. Tom's hand stilled on the plane he was holding. Go on. It wasn't just random violence. Daniel was carrying something, papers from what I hear. Something both gangs wanted badly enough to turn the trading post into a battlefield. The official story about a gang fight breaking out. Nobody who was there believes it. The plane in Tom's hands cracked, a thin line appearing in the rosewood handle. What kind of papers? Port deeds, shipping routes, the kind of documents that could give one side control of every supply line from here to Nova Scotia. Jimmy leaned forward. Your brother wasn't just passing through, was he? He was carrying something that could change everything in this territory. Before Tom could answer, Mai burst in through the front door, her medicine bag clutched tight, rain glistening in her dark hair. Tom, Sarah's been shot. They found the chandler in the alley behind her shop, blood seeping through her dress and mixing with the rain puddles. Tom cradled her head while Mai worked to stem the bleeding. Who did this? Tom asked softly. Both, Sarah gasped, her face pale as sea foam. O'Malley's men saw me talking to Blackburn's lookouts, but Blackburn's men. She coughed, blood staining her lips. They shot first thinking I was. Don't try to talk, Mai commanded, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Jimmy, I need light. The boy produced a match, illuminating Mai's grim work. In the flickering light, Tom could see the fear in Sarah's eyes, not of death but of something else, something she needed to share before it was too late. The papers, Sarah whispered. Your brother, he trusted me to. She grabbed Tom's collar with surprising strength. In the lighthouse, under the third floorboard from the west wall. Her grip weakened. I'm sorry I couldn't keep them safe longer. Stay with us, Mai urged, but Tom could see it was too late. Sarah's eyes had gone distant, fixed on some point far beyond Mill Haven's petty wars. They buried her that night in the small cemetery behind the church. Old Ezra had dug the grave without being asked, his usual gallows humor absent for once. The autumn rain fell steadily, carrying salt spray and the promise of more violence to come. Sarah's death marked more than the loss of a life. It was the first shot in a war that would consume Mill Haven. Town's choosing sides, Jimmy observed as they walked back, their boots splashing through rain-filled potholes. Soon, there won't be any neutral ground left. There never was, Tom replied. He looked at Mai, who hadn't spoken since pronouncing Sarah dead. Doctor, I think it's time you and Jimmy left town. She met his gaze steadily. My father said the same thing at Antietam. I stayed then too. Stayed through the worst of it, patching up boys younger than Jimmy. This isn't a war. Isn't it? Her hand touched his arm. You're planning something. Something that started before Sarah's death. I can see it in your eyes. The same look the soldiers had before a battle. Tom was silent for a long moment, watching the rain fall on Mill Haven's empty streets. Finally, he said, Come by the workshop at midnight, both of you. There are things you need to know. Decisions to be made. As they parted ways, Tom could feel the weight of his brother's woodworking compass pressing against his chest where he wore it under his shirt, a gift from Daniel's wife before they'd set out for Fort Harbor. He touched it briefly, a soldier's gesture that was half prayer, half promise. The time for playing both sides was over. Mill Haven's reckoning was about to begin. The church bell struck midnight as Mai and Jimmy approached the workshop, their breath misting in the cold rain. Water dripped from the eaves and moonlight pierced the clouds to cast blue shadows across the empty street. Tom waited at the back door, Carpenter's maul holstered but close at hand, his experienced eyes constantly scanning the rooflines and alleyways. The town had grown eerily quiet, even the usual drunken carousing silenced by the tension in the air, and the steady rain that muffled every sound like a burial shroud. Inside, Tom had cleared the workbench except for 3 glasses and a lamp burning low. The autumn wind rattled the windows, making the shadows dance across walls that had seen their share of violence. The tools hanging on the walls caught the lamplight like watching eyes, silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his vest, yellowed, creased, and stained with what might have been blood, or maybe just the rust-colored stains of sea spray. My brother wasn't just passing through Fort Harbor, he began, spreading the paper on the workbench's scarred surface. It was a map showing shipping routes, both existing and planned, with handwritten notes in the margins. The ink had faded in places, but the implications were clear as day. He was carrying information that could shift the balance of power in these territories. Jimmy studied the map, his young eyes tracing the lines with the sharp intelligence that seemed to run in his family. These shipping routes, they connect everything from the lumber camps to the fishing fleets. They'd control everything, Mai finished, her quick mind connecting the pieces. Supply lines, timber shipments, fishing grounds, and more importantly, she looked up at Tom, understanding dawning in her eyes. They'd control which ports live and which die, just like what happened to Portsmouth when the steam routes bypassed it. Tom nodded grimly. The railroads are coming. That's certain as sunrise. Question is, where exactly will the new port be built? These documents proved that both O'Malley and Blackburn have been bribing harbor officials, trying to ensure the route favors their territories. That's why they turned Fort Harbor into a bloodbath. Daniel was working for the Harbor Commission, Jimmy realized, understanding dawning in his eyes. Investigating both gangs. He wasn't just some lumberman with a shipment. No wonder they tried to kill Sarah. She must have been helping him all along. Tom poured 3 fingers of whiskey for Mai and himself, and coffee for Jimmy. The bottles clinked softly, a sound like distant ship's bells. Daniel knew it was dangerous, so he split up the documents. Some he kept with him, others he entrusted to people along his route. People like Sarah, people he thought he could trust. Mai's eyes widened. The papers in the lighthouse. She glanced toward the front windows where rain was streaming down the glass like nature's own curtain. O'Malley's men are watching the harbor entrance. I counted 3 of them earlier, hiding in the old sail loft. Blackburn probably has the back covered. That's why I need your help. Tom leaned forward, his voice low and intense as a prayer. Mai, you can enter the lighthouse without suspicion. Everyone knows you tend to the old keeper's gout. The gangs won't risk stopping you, not when they might need your services tomorrow. Jimmy, you'll create a distraction at your sister's clinic. A small fire, nothing dangerous, but enough to draw their attention. And you? Mai asked, though she already knew the answer, could see it in the set of his shoulders and the steel in his eyes. I'll get the papers. Tom pulled out another document, this one newer, its crisp paper a stark contrast to the worn map. But first, I need witnesses for this. It was a letter to the Harbor Commission, detailed and damning. It laid out both gangs' corruption, their violence, the innocent lives lost in their war for control. At the bottom was a blank space for signatures, waiting like an open grave. Your testimony would make this official, Tom explained. Give the commission cause to send in federal marshals. End this once and for all. Turn Millhaven back into a place where honest folk can live without fear. Jimmy picked up a pen without hesitation, his young face set with determination. About time someone stood up to them. He signed with a flourish that belied his youth but spoke of his courage. Mai studied Tom's face in the lamplight, seeing past the hardened exterior to something deeper. This was never about revenge, was it? You could have just killed them both by now if that's all you wanted. Justice wears many faces, Doctor. He offered her the pen, its steel nib catching the light like a drawn blade. Sometimes it looks like revenge, sometimes like redemption. The trick is knowing which face to show, and when. She signed her name below her brother's. The sound of gunfire suddenly erupted from the north side of town, making them all jump. The shots echoed off the buildings like the drums of war. Tomorrow night, Tom said, rolling up both documents carefully. When the moon is high. O'Malley's men will be distracted. I've arranged for some of their boats to be sabotaged. Blackburn's watchers have a weakness for certain drinks that will be stronger than usual. The weather should help us too. More rain's coming, and that means poor visibility. That still leaves a lot that could go wrong, Jimmy observed, showing wisdom beyond his years. Everything that matters carries risk, Tom replied. He touched the compass under his shirt, Daniel's compass now, a reminder of the price of standing aside. But sometimes the bigger risk is doing nothing. Sometimes you have to step into the storm to calm it. As if to punctuate his words, more gunshots rang out from the north side of town. They rushed to the window to see flames beginning to rise from one of O'Malley's warehouses, the fire painting the falling rain in shades of hell. Blackburn's making his move, Jimmy said grimly, his hand instinctively checking his hidden knife. No, Tom corrected, his experienced eye taking in the pattern of the attack. This is something else. The shots are too precise, too coordinated. Military training, not gang violence. Mai gripped his arm. The Harbor Commission, they wouldn't move without evidence. This is something else entirely. Someone who knows what's coming and wants to get ahead of it. More shots rang out, closer now. In the firelight, they could see figures moving through the streets with military precision, their shadows dancing like devils on the wet cobblestones. We need to get those papers, Tom said urgently. Tonight, before whoever this is tears the town apart looking for them. Jimmy checked the small knife Mai hadn't known he carried. I'll get the fire started at the clinic. Give you 15 minutes, maybe 20. Mai squared her shoulders, rain streaming down her back like lost spirits. I'll head to the lighthouse now. It won't seem strange for the doctor to check on people during the fighting. Tom caught her hand before she could leave. Mai, thank you, both of you. She smiled, brief but genuine. Just make it count. As they separated into the chaos-filled night, Tom felt the weight of years of war, of loss, of choices made and prices paid settling onto his shoulders. But for the first time since Daniel's death, that weight felt like purpose instead of burden. Millhaven's day of reckoning had arrived early, and this time he was ready. The night was about to become very interesting indeed, and somewhere in the swirling rain answers waited to be found, if they could live long enough to uncover them. Gunfire lit up Millhaven's streets like heat lightning, casting sharp shadows against burning buildings. Tom moved through the chaos with practiced stealth, keeping to the darkened alleys where the rain dampened his footsteps. Through the smoke and driving rain, he caught glimpses of unfamiliar men in dark oilskins. No badges, no identifying marks, their coordinated movements suggesting military training. Professional manhunters, he guessed, or maybe Pinkerton agents. Either way, they were methodically searching buildings, looking for something, or someone. A bullet whizzed past his head, embedding itself in a wooden post with a dull thunk. Tom dropped and rolled, drawing his maul in one fluid motion, muscle memory from 100 battlefield encounters taking over. Two shadows detached themselves from a doorway, O'Malley's men, but moving with unusual desperation. "Hold it right there, Blackburn," one called out, voice shaking. "Boss wants to talk about the papers." "Or about Daniel." The second man stepped forward, moonlight revealing a face Tom recognized, Jamie Ryan, one of the Fort Harbor survivors. Before Tom could respond, precise rifle fire cut down both men. The shots came from the lighthouse tower, a position that should have been impossible to reach unnoticed. "Damn," Tom muttered, breaking into a run as more shots followed his movement. Whoever these new players were, they had professionals in their ranks, the kind of men who thought like him. He found Mai crouched behind the harbor steps, her medical bag clutched tight against her chest. "They're everywhere," she whispered, voice tight with controlled fear. "Moving like soldiers, but not Navy. They shot the lighthouse keeper when he tried to ring the warning bell. These aren't just hired guns." "Papers still inside?" Tom asked, checking his tools. "Third floorboard from the west wall, like Sarah said." Mai grabbed his arm. "Tom, I heard them talking. They mentioned something about Operation Kingspike and a master list. And they mentioned a name, Montgomery." Tom felt his blood run cold. William Montgomery, the railroad baron, the man who owned half the shipping lines east of the Mississippi. "Daniel must have found evidence connecting him to both gangs," he said quietly. "No wonder they want those papers so badly." An explosion rocked the north end of town, Jimmy's distraction at the clinic. Through the smoke, they could see O'Malley's men falling back, exchanging fire with the dark-clothed attackers. Blackburn's gang was nowhere to be seen. "Now's our chance," Tom said. "Stay close." They slipped into the lighthouse through a service door, the interior dark except for moonlight filtering through salt-crusted windows, casting wavering shadows across worn wooden stairs. The lighthouse keeper's body lay crumpled by the bell rope, a testament to the attackers' ruthlessness. Mai knelt by the third floorboard while Tom kept watch. Her fingers found a loose plank, then a packet wrapped in oilcloth. Got it. A slow clap echoed through the lighthouse tower. Well done, Miss Chen. Marcus Blackburn stepped from behind a support beam, flanked by his men. I'll take those papers now. This isn't your fight anymore, Blackburn, Tom warned, positioning himself between Mai and the gang leader. Montgomery's men will kill everyone who knows about these documents, you included. You think I don't know that? Blackburn laughed bitterly. Why do you think I've been trying to buy my way out? The shipping contracts, the protection money, all of it was to get enough leverage to escape Montgomery's grip. More footsteps approached from behind, O'Malley and his men boxing them in. The Irish gang leader's face was streaked with rain and soot. He's right, O'Malley said, his accent thickening with stress. We both played Montgomery's game, thinking we could outsmart him. Now he's cutting his losses, Tom finished, the pieces falling into place, along with any loose ends. Daniel hadn't just stumbled onto gang warfare, he'd uncovered something far bigger, a conspiracy that stretched from Boston to Halifax with Montgomery pulling the strings. A new voice rang out from the gallery. Quite right, Mr. Caldwell. A tall figure in an expensive raincoat emerged, surrounded by professional gunmen, though I prefer to think of it as corporate restructuring. William Montgomery, the railroad baron himself, smiled down at them like a banker foreclosing on a widow's home. Now, about those papers. Tom's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. Mai's hand found his, passing something metal, her derringer, small but deadly at close range. Outside, Jimmy's fire was spreading, casting hellish light through the windows. Millhaven's power struggle had just become something far deadlier than a simple gang war. I'll make this simple, Montgomery called down, his Boston accent strange in the frontier lighthouse. The papers, your silence, and you all walk away. Resist, and my men will paint these lighthouse walls with your blood. Like you did in Fort Harbor? Tom's voice carried to the rafters. How many innocent people died to keep your shipping empire secret? Business requires sacrifice, Mr. Caldwell. Surely a military man understands that. O'Malley stepped forward, his Irish pride bristling. We're not your employees anymore, Montgomery. This is our territory. Your territory? Montgomery laughed. Everything from Nova Scotia to New York belongs to me. You're just the local management, easily replaced. Tom felt Mai press against his back, both of them scanning for escape routes. The derringer was a comforting weight in his palm, but against these odds it wouldn't make much difference. Then he saw it. Through gaps in the wooden wall, he could see that the fire had reached the cooperage. The dry wood was catching fast, and the stored barrels of pitch would go up like gunpowder. Now, Mr. Caldwell, Montgomery called impatiently. The papers. You want them? Tom raised the oilcloth packet slowly. Catch. He hurled the package toward the gallery, but not at Montgomery. The papers sailed through a broken window, landing on the burning cooperage roof. Chaos erupted as the papers sailed through the window. Montgomery's men fired, but Blackburn and O'Malley had already drawn on them, years of mutual hatred temporarily forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Mai's derringer barked twice, dropping a man trying to flank them. The lighthouse erupted in gunfire, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The cooperage! Tom shouted as flames began consuming the papers. It's going to... The explosion rocked Millhaven like a cannon blast. The cooperage's pitch stores went up in a fireball, sending burning debris through the lighthouse windows. Smoke filled the tower as old dry wood caught fire. Glass shattered, raining colored shards like a kaleidoscope of destruction. Kill them all! Montgomery screamed, his sophisticated facade cracking. Find those papers! But Tom had already pulled Mai behind a support beam where a trapdoor led to the lighthouse's maintenance tunnel. They dropped down just as O'Malley's men opened up with repeating rifles, the sound of battle above muffled by the thick floorboards as they crawled through the musty space. The papers, Mai gasped as they moved through the darkness. All that evidence. Were those the only copies? Copies, Tom finished with grim satisfaction. The originals are still in my workshop safe. Daniel taught me to always keep backups. Man was cautious to a fault. They emerged from the tunnel's external exit into smoke-filled chaos. Jimmy was waiting with horses, his young face streaked with soot and something darker, the price of innocence lost. "The town's going up," he reported, voice steady despite everything. "Montgomery's men are shooting anyone who tries to flee. They've got the main roads blocked." "Get my out of here," Tom ordered, checking his tools. "Take the mountain trail north. There's a harbor commission office in Portland. The papers in my workshop safe prove everything. Montgomery's bribes, the murders, all of it. What about you?" Mai grabbed his arm, her eyes reflecting the flames consuming Millhaven. "Someone has to slow them down. Give you time to get those papers to people who can use them." "That's suicide," Jimmy protested, showing the fierce loyalty that seemed to run in his family. Tom smiled grimly. "Maybe. But I didn't come here to survive. I came for justice." He pressed a key into Mai's hand. "Safe in the workshop, under the floorboards, third plank from the forge." Mai's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady as steel. "Make them pay. For Daniel. For Sarah." Tom nodded. "For everyone they've buried in their climb to power." As Mai and Jimmy galloped away, Tom turned back toward the burning lighthouse. Through the smoke, he could see Montgomery's men spreading out, searching for survivors. Blackburn and O'Malley's gangs had vanished into the night, their brief alliance already forgotten in the chaos. The railroad barons' forces were moving with military precision, securing the town building by building. Tom checked his tools one last time. The weight of Daniel's compass reminded him of all the debts still to be paid. The time for hiding behind a carpenter's facade was over. Ghost Builder had one last fortress to breach. He moved through the burning town like a shadow, using the smoke for cover. Years of military training took over. Every doorway became potential cover, every sound a signal. He made his way to his workshop, knowing Montgomery's men would search it eventually. Inside, the workshop was eerily quiet. Tom retrieved his old combat engineering tools from their hiding place behind the workbench. The implements that had earned him his nickname would see one more battle. From the workshop's second floor, he had clear lines of sight to most of the street. Montgomery's men were moving in teams of 3, professional but predictable. Tom settled into position, controlling his breathing just as he had on countless battlefields. The first shot from his modified nail gun caught a team leader in the chest before his companions could react. A second round found its mark. The third man dove for cover, but Tom had already shifted position. "Sniper!" The cry went up through Montgomery's ranks. "Second floor of the workshop." Tom smiled grimly. Let them come. He'd prepared for this, laying out ammunition at key points throughout the building. As Montgomery's men attempted to surround the workshop, he picked them off one by one, each shot deliberate, each target chosen to create maximum confusion. "Damn you, Caldwell!" Montgomery's voice carried through the smoke. "There's no escape. The whole town's surrounded." Tom's response was another precisely placed shot that sent Montgomery diving behind a water barrel. He counted his remaining ammunition, enough for what needed to be done. Movement caught his eye as Blackburn emerged from an alley, leading a counterattack against Montgomery's men. The gang leader had found his courage at last. On the other side of town, O'Malley's crew was engaging another group of Montgomery's forces. "Like rats in a trap," Tom muttered, picking off a man trying to flank Blackburn's position. The town's original power struggle had reignited, but with a desperate edge. Everyone knew there was no going back to the old arrangements. A bullet splintered the window frame beside him. One of Montgomery's professional killers had joined the fight, his shots showing real skill. Tom shifted position again, mapping the changing battlefield in his mind. More shots rang out in the distance. Mai and Jimmy hadn't gotten far enough away. Montgomery's men were pursuing them. He had to buy them more time. He made his way to the workshop roof, crawling through thick smoke. From this vantage point, he could see the entire bloody tableau Millhaven had become. Montgomery's men were pressing in from all sides, but the combined resistance of the local gangs was holding them back. The railroad barons' careful plans were unraveling in fire and lead. Tom set up his final position on the workshop roof, his modified carpentry tools gleaming dully in the firelight. The smell of burning wood and gunpowder filled the air, a scent that brought back memories of too many battlefields. The weapons felt alive in his hands, like greeting old friends who shared too many dark secrets. One by one, he began taking shots at Montgomery's key lieutenants. Each round found its mark with deadly precision, sowing chaos in their ranks. The same precision that had earned him his nickname was now being used to dismantle a different kind of army. "That's enough!" Montgomery stepped into the open street, using one of his own men as a shield. His expensive coat was soaked with rain and soot, but his voice still carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. His gold watch chain glinted in the firelight, a symbol of the wealth he'd built on others' suffering. "Face me like a man, Caldwell. Or are you only brave behind those tools? Is that how you killed my associates at Fort Harbor, too?" Tom considered the shot. Difficult, but not impossible. Just like at Petersburg, when Blackburn's brother had led that doomed defense. The distance, the wind, the moving target, all calculations his mind made automatically after years of practice. But before he could take the shot, an explosion rocked the workshop foundation. Montgomery's men had planted dynamite while he was focused on the street. The building began to collapse, timbers groaning like dying men. Tom ran for the edge of the roof, his boots finding purchase on the burning shingles. Below, 3 of Montgomery's best killers waited with drawn weapons, eager to add Ghost Builder to their list of victories. He recognized them, professionals from Boston, men whose reputations for violence rivaled his own from the war. Time seemed to slow as Tom leaped from the burning building, his tools coming up as he fell. Muscle memory took over, the same instincts that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. The night air whistled past him as he squeezed the trigger, his body already adjusting for the fall. 2 shots split the night, one rising, one falling, like answering prayers in the darkness. Tom hit the ground rolling, his shoulder taking the impact just as he'd been taught in the combat engineers. 2 of Montgomery's men stood frozen, then crumpled like marionettes with cut strings. The third managed to fire, his bullet grazing Tom's side before a return shot silenced him forever. "Impressive," Montgomery called out, genuine admiration in his voice. "I can see why they called you Ghost Builder. The stories about you from the war, I thought they were exaggerated. Tell me, Caldwell, how much is your loyalty worth? I could use a man with your skills. Name your price." Tom took cover behind an overturned wagon as more of Montgomery's men opened fire. Through gaps in the wagon's boards, he could see O'Malley's gang pressing their advantage, driving deeper into the railroad baron's lines. "My loyalty is not for sale," Tom called back, reloading with practiced ease. "Ask your men at Fort Harbor how that worked out for them. Or better yet, ask the widows you left behind." "Everything's for sale," Montgomery laughed, the sound harsh as breaking glass. "Land, lives, loyalty. It's all just numbers in a ledger. That's how empires are built, Caldwell. Your brother learned that too late. Such a waste of potential." The words hit Tom harder than any bullet. "What do you mean?" "Poor Daniel." Montgomery's voice dripped false sympathy. "He really thought he could change things with his evidence. Thought if he just showed the right documents to the right people, justice would prevail. Such an idealist, just like your father was before he learned better." "You knew," Tom realized, the final pieces falling into place like the trajectory of a killing shot. "You knew he was coming to Fort Harbor. You had men waiting for him." "Of course I knew. I paid good money to know everything that happens in my territories. Your brother wasn't the first honest man to die protecting his principles, and he won't be the last. The East Coast wasn't built on principles, Caldwell. It was built on blood and gold." A bullet whizzed past Tom's head, forcing him lower behind the wagon. From his new position, he spotted Mai's clinic and, more importantly, the kegs of lamp oil stored in its cellar. If he could reach them, he might have a chance to end this once and for all. "Sir." One of Montgomery's lieutenants grabbed his arm, panic evident in his voice. "Riders approaching from the south. Looks like law." Montgomery's composure cracked for the first time, his carefully maintained facade showing the desperation beneath. "How many?" "At least 20. Federal marshals by the badges, they're riding hard." "Take half the men," Montgomery ordered, his voice tight with controlled rage. Hunt down those papers. The girl and boy couldn't have gotten far. The rest of you burn him out. I want Caldwell's body to be unrecognizable." Oil lamps shattered around Tom's position, flames spreading quickly across the dry wood. The heat became intense, smoke threatening to choke him. He had to move. A shadow appeared through the flames. Blackburn, offering covering fire from his position behind a stack of timber. "Consider my brother's debt paid, Caldwell. Now we're even." Tom sprinted from the burning wagon to Mai's clinic, bullets churning the dirt at his heels. He could hear hoofbeats thundering from the south, federal marshals finally arriving. Through smoke and chaos, he worked quickly, positioning oil kegs for a final devastating blast. Montgomery appeared in the clinic doorway, dark silhouette against flames, unaware he was standing exactly where Tom needed him. "Die with your brother," he snarled, raising a derringer. 2 shots split the dawn. Montgomery stood frozen, the derringer dropping from nerveless fingers. A small red flower bloomed on his chest, directly over his heart. He looked almost surprised as he toppled backward into the burning ruins of his ambitions. "That was for Daniel," Tom whispered. Mai reached him first as he sagged against a hitching post, her skilled hands quickly assessing his wounds as federal marshals swarmed the town, rounding up Montgomery's surviving men. A week later, Tom stood watching the sun rise over what remained of Mill Haven. The marshals had established a new office in the rebuilt harbor. Mai's clinic was thriving, and Jimmy had been appointed as junior deputy. Ships were returning, bringing honest commerce instead of corruption. He touched Daniel's compass one last time, then handed it to Mai. "Time to build something new," he said quietly. She took his hand, and together they walked toward the future they'd fought to create, one where justice and redemption could finally find common ground. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.